This program, of course, is presented by Pro Wrestling Illustrated, the most widely read, widely sold, and respected wrestling magazine in the world today.
This is a Pro Wrestling Illustrated podcast. I'm your host, PWI senior writer Al Castle, joined once again by my co-host, Brian Solomon. How's it going?
Great, Al. Happy to be here with you as always.
Yes, you've got some big news about your book, right? Some exciting stuff going on.
I do. You know, I wanted to say that it recently went on pre-sale, so it's actually available to be ordered now. And just based on the pre-sale alone, it was number one recently on Amazon for wrestling books, like all wrestling books. So so it's called Blood and Fire, and it's the biography of the Sheik. So if you just even search for Blood and Fire and Sheik in Amazon, you'll find it, and you can pre-order it. It's not out till April 12th, but we're actually still finalizing the look of the book and everything, but it'll definitely be ready by then. So I'm super, super excited.
Did you get any kind of boost from the Vice documentary about Onita and FMW and the subject we've talked about, that crazy fire match with the Sheik?
Yeah, it's possible that the timing of the on sale may have been beneficial because, like you said, the Sheik was mentioned in there, and Sabu was interviewed, and they showed some footage from that match. So, I mean, it could be. It's possible. I think it was interesting that the title, I don't know if you noticed, the title of that episode, the FMW Dark Side of the Ring episode, was Blood and Wire.
Oh, really?
Yes. So not that I'm paranoid, but considering that my book's called Blood and Fire and it's also about the Sheik, I would say it may not entirely have been a coincidence. Let's just put it that way.
I don't think I've asked you, but how much, if at all, was Sabu a resource for you in putting the book together?
Well, not directly, unfortunately, because Sabu, I had reached out to him, and I was really good friends with Melissa Coates, who was his valet and his girlfriend. And she had tried to really help me out. But Sabu really kind of will only talk if you pay him. He's one of those guys.
Yeah.
Abdullah the Butcher was the same way. You have to pay him. And it's just that's kind of out of my hands. ECW Press does not pay for interviews. And I certainly don't have the money to start paying people out of my pocket.
Right. Nor should they. I mean, that's just not the way this works. Yeah.
I mean, he would like throw a hint my way through Melissa. Like, it was really weird, like a game of telephone. And also, Melissa, and I should say, unfortunately, as many listeners may know, she did pass away a few months ago, which was horrible. And we had just been talking the night before about the Sheik book and about Sabu, but she was acting as a go-between, and she sent me a copy of his book, Sabu's book, which is Scars, Silence, and Superglue. I think that's the name of it, or something like that. And I did use his book as an extensive source. So where I'm not quoting him directly, but I am quoting from the book, and I did get some interesting facts from that book. So it was sort of like indirectly dealing with Sabu. It's too bad we couldn't have had more of a connection.
Yeah. What did you think of the Vice documentary on FMW? I thought it was a blast. And it's always great when you don't know the subject all that well, because it is kind of a revelation. And, probably the best education I've gotten before that was our conversation about some of this. So what was your take on it?
It was very interesting. I knew some things about FMW, but really because of the book, the main stuff that I knew was as it related to Sheik and Sabu. Mm-hmm. So this kind of gave me even more background. Like I don't think I fully realized how successful the promotion was.
I think that was my big takeaway too. I mean, you hear the kind of money that Onita was making at the time. Yeah, he was a big success and a big draw.
I saw it mainly as the Japan version of ECW, but especially like ECW in the early years. But it sounds like the success that FMW had at their peak may have been bigger than anything ECW experienced, honestly. Yeah. And I have to say, it's funny because we talk about these death matches and things, and you remember the Nick Gage episode, which really rubbed me the wrong way. And this felt different to me. And the reason is this may not be my favorite kind of wrestling. I'm probably not going to sit down and like kick back and enjoy some FMW death matches. I know a lot of people do love it. But the difference is this was big business. This was making money. So it makes more sense to me that they were doing it, than what happens with, at least so far. I know they're on the rise, but so far with GCW, FMW was a totally different animal. It was like you had Onita on, they showed him on like game shows, and TV talk shows and things. So I thought it was really interesting. Of course, my personal bias, I wish they had gone into more stuff about the Sheik, because I do know that Onita and the Sheik were very close. Onita had been a young boy for Baba in All Japan, and so he was carrying bags around for guys like the Sheik in the 70s, and he worshipped him. And like really, when he started the company, Sheik was one of the first guys he wanted to try to bring in, and he didn't even know if he was still alive, let alone active, and he somehow got a hold of him. And in his own way, I mean, I know the poor guy almost died, but in his own way, he gave the Sheik kind of like this coda to his career that I think he deserved. There was even a retirement ceremony for the Sheik in 1998 that was done by Onita in FMW, and it was like the icing on the cake to his career. So they had a really interesting relationship. And I would have liked to have seen a lot more. I would love to see a whole episode just on the Sheik, but I don't know if they generally tend to go back that far on Dark Side of the Ring. I feel like if it's like the 80s is like their cutoff. So it reminds me a little bit of what ESPN does with the 30 for 30 specials and what HBO has done with their really great sports documentary. They have a series, I think it was Real Sports or something with Bryant Gumbel, really good stuff. And the problem that I have with those two is that they also go back only basically to like 1980. And that's all well and good. I know they're going for their audience and what they actually remember in their own lifetime. But there's a lot of really fascinating stories in sports and wrestling that go back before that. And I would love for Dark Side of the Ring, maybe as the seasons go along and they start running out of material, to tackle some of those. There's just really fascinating stuff. There might not be as many people alive to talk about it firsthand.
Yeah, it's one of the challenges. Yeah,
it's worth doing, though, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that even kind of overlaps into so much of what the headlines are in wrestling these days about demographics, right? And the reality is, if you're in an older demographic, people for whom some of that would be relevant, you're not always the highest priority for media companies, and so yeah, a lot of that's history gets lost. But yeah, I've enjoyed the second half of this season of Dark Side of the Ring. I think more than the first. I thought the Canyon one was really good. We talked about the Plane Ride from Hell. So are they? Do you know if they're done? Because they had the rerun on this week, the David Schultz one.
Well, they had the Johnny Canine one was on last night.
Oh, really? I did see that. Okay, good.
Yeah, Johnny Canine, and then they're doing Luna Vachon.
Oh, okay, good. There's a few left.
They're finishing, I think I'm missing some. There's definitely more to come, but they're closing out this season with the steroid trial, which
that's huge.
Yeah, that's huge. I think probably they're not touching the Ring Boy scandal. I'm thinking that's probably a whole separate episode if they.
Yeah, I mean, you say they run out, but then this is pro wrestling.
No, it's true. You ever run out. Another one from the 80s that I know they're eventually going to do. They have to do it, but I think they're holding off. Is the whole Andy Kaufman thing? Even I don't know if it quite qualifies for Dark Side, but I mean, from the point of view of his career, it kind of wasn't seen as the best thing for his career, but I think the hold off on that is you can't do that episode without Jerry Lawler. And as long as Jerry Lawler is under contract to WWE, they're not going to be able to get him. So my guess is they probably want to do it, and they're probably waiting until they could, maybe get Lawler to be involved.
Yeah, that's not all that dark. I mean, it was controversial, fascinating. I mean, talked about. I guess in a way it's sort of like the one that they just reran with David Schultz and the slap heard around the world.
Right. A lot of people do talk about how, I mean, even though it's remembered as a great angle, and it was, from an outside the wrestling bubble, a lot of people talk about that as part of the downward spiral of Andy Kaufman's career and life. I mean, like all
That's
of
just
his,
it. Yeah, it would almost end up being kind of a biography of Andy.
yeah, his Taxi co-stars. Like I remember hearing, I forget who it was, somebody who was a wrestling person and who had interviewed like Judd Hirsch or somebody like that. And when they would bring up the wrestling, they would just get really sad and just be like, I don't want to talk about that. Like Andy, that was a really bad time of his life, and we didn't understand why he did that, and it kind of like ruined his career. So I mean,
Wow.
that's the point of view of non-wrestling people of him doing that. So
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, the movie they made, what's that? Close to 20 years ago now.
Yeah.
That was a big piece of it. So yeah, I mean, it wasn't a small chapter in his history.
Right.
Anyway, yeah, lots of fun stuff to watch on Vice. As for this episode, stay tuned. At the end, I've got a fun conversation with a major name who's about to have the biggest match of his career, the Walking Weapon, Josh Alexander, who I've got to say has the coolest nickname maybe in all of wrestling, right? That's just fantastic.
Yes.
Who is going to be challenging for the Impact World Title at Impact's biggest show of the year, Bound for Glory. I got to chat with him yesterday, talking about this opportunity and all the stakes, and also a kind of a look at Impact, something we don't always talk about too much here. So he gives his thoughts on working for the company and kind of where they're at now. And a fun conversation. He even talks about seeing his old tag team partner with another man, and we kind of had some fun talking about maybe making some comparisons about a breakup, and then you see your old girlfriend with a new guy. So a lot of fun. Stay tuned for that. Let's tell them also about Pro Wrestling Illustrated right now, the PWI 500. Let me get this right, the 30th anniversary? No, the 30th edition, yes, of the PWI. No, wait a minute. It's the 30th anniversary of the PWI 500, right? The 31st PWI 500, the 30th anniversary, is available. It's got Kenny Omega on the cover, the #1 ranked wrestler in the world. Still time to get this issue, our biggest issue of the year, and it's absolutely loaded. I've got mine, the hard copy, in my hand. You can get yours sent to your house, or you can download it right away, the digital edition. If you subscribe, you get big, deep savings over the cover price. And in just a couple weeks now, we've got the female 150. I think we dropped that bit of news earlier this week. It was the women's. Originally, it was the female 50, then the women's 100. Now it's the women's 150, I believe. So that's growing, and I had a hand in putting that together. I think a lot of people are going to be talking about that as well. And we're just starting to get talking about the tag team issue again, the second annual tag team 50. I think we're keeping it at 50. We're starting to put that together. So this is fun, and it's kind of becoming the ranking season for us. And you don't want to miss any of them. So go ahead and subscribe now. PWI-online.com. Again, you get big, deep savings over the cover price. Don't have to worry about finding it at your CVS or your Barnes & Nobles if there's still any of those around. Just have it sent right to your home. A completely redesigned PWI webpage with lots of fun links, a more user-friendly look, interface, and links to our social media at Official PWI on Twitter and Instagram. We also do a bunch of stuff on YouTube. Candace has got some great interviews, some of which we featured here on the podcast. Check those out. And what else? Pick up the shirts, please. Pro Wrestling Illustrated line of T-shirts at ProWrestlingTees.com and WhatAmaneuver.net. All right, so what I wanted to talk about last time, it's been a few weeks, so one of the big things that's happened since we've last talked is the WWE Draft. And we've talked in the last few episodes about, WWE's response, if it's that, maybe they would deny that that's the case, to the success that AEW is having. And, they've done drafts lots of years, so this wouldn't be a direct response. But it is, or you would think it is, in as much as it's an opportunity for them to kind of recast both brands and sort of optimize them, put their best foot forward, so to speak. And it's kind of interesting where they land. So why don't I go over the rosters? I think I've got them here. It's probably the easiest way to go. So Raw, their male roster after the draft is you got Big E at the top as the WWE champion, which I don't know that we've talked about, and I think pretty universally he's gotten some good reviews, and I think Big E's doing a fine job. I mean, how much of a difference maker he's going to be still remains to be seen. You got Randy Orton, Riddle, Edge, for what that's worth. I mean, a part-timer, Keith Bearcat Lee, Rey Mysterio and Dominic Mysterio, Austin Theory moved up from NXT, Bobby Lashley, Seth Rollins, Damian Priest, AJ Styles, and Omos. Kevin Owens comes over to Raw. Montez Ford and Angelo Dawkins, the Street Profits. Finn Balor comes over from SmackDown. Karrion Kross, Gable Steveson, it's a big one, Olympic gold medalist. You know, what he really means, I don't know, because I'm guessing it's a while before we actually see him in the ring. Drake Maverick, Reggie, Akira Tozawa, Chad Gable, Otis, R-Truth. So basically the 24, what is that they call it? 24/7 title comes over to Raw. Or was it there already? I don't even know. John Morrison, T-Bar, Apollo Crews, Commander Aziz, they come over. Dolph Ziggler and Robert Roode, the Dirty Dogs, Jackson Riker, Veer, Shelton Benjamin, Cedric Alexander, and The Miz. Another thing we haven't talked about, the Hurt Business being back together, which I popped huge for. I was a big fan of the Hurt Business. As for the women, Bianca Belair comes over to Raw. Rhea Ripley and Nikki Ash, the tag champions. Becky Lynch comes over. Alexa Bliss, Carmella, Nia Jax, Selena Vega, Doudrop, Dana Brooke, Liv Morgan, Mia Yim, called up Tamina and Tegan Nox. So SmackDown, smaller, but they've got one fewer hours, so I guess that makes sense. You got Roman Reigns, Drew McIntyre, probably the biggest name going over there. Kofi Kingston, Xavier Wood, New Day go over there, so they keep the New Day members separate on different brands. Happy Corbin, Madcap Moss, Isaiah Scott called up. Top Dollar, Ashanti Adonis, Jeff Hardy, Jimmy Uso, Jey Uso, Nakamura, Rick Boogs, Sheamus, Eric and Ivar, the Vikings, Ricochet moved over to SmackDown. Humberto Carrillo and Angel Garza, Cesaro, Ridge Holland, Sami Zayn, Drew Gulak, Mace, Mustafa Ali, Mansoor, Jinder Mahal, and Shanky. And the women, you got Charlotte going over there, so they switch champions. B-Fab called up, Naomi, Sasha Banks, Shayna Baszler, Xia Li, Aaliyah called up, Toni Storm, Shotzi Blackheart, and Natalya. So a lot there. What's the big takeaway? I mean, one thing that I was sort of concerned about was I think SmackDown for some time has been significantly better than Raw. Part of that is just being an hour less, but I also think they had a more solid roster. And what happened is kind of what I worried about is that in an attempt to sort of equalize the two brands, I worry that you end up with kind of two mediocre brands rather than one pretty good one and then one pretty bad one, which was Raw. But I don't know. I don't know if that's the case. What's your take?
Well, I think that, well, first of all, I just want to say, I don't know if they always did it this way or if this is a newer development, but I do not think that title holders should be up for draft. I think it's ridiculous if you've got somebody that's the champion or a champion on your brand, that person shouldn't just be able to jump over to the other brand and just switch titles or whatever the heck they do. I think champions should be exempt from the draft. I also have to say, I don't know if I'm in the minority or the majority here, but I think this entire draft concept is so incredibly tired to me. And I can't understand how people even muster up the enthusiasm to even get excited about it. It's just this constant shuffling back and forth of guys and girls from one show to the other, and it just gets to the point where it just all starts to feel kind of meaningless to me. I don't know. Maybe it's just because I never was a fan of the brand extension to begin with. I can't get excited about the draft anymore.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, it certainly doesn't mean what it used to, and the ratings bear that out. And I get what you're talking about. I also do see the need for a semi-regular shakeup, because the reality is in a year or two, you're going to exhaust those top matches, right? I mean, you could only have Bobby Lashley and Drew McIntyre wrestle so many times, right, before they need fresh opponents. So I think it accomplishes that. I don't know if it's a matter of maybe keeping it a lot smaller, right? Or doing it throughout the year. I mean, certainly
Well,
you
because
look at the.
we know that in reality, I mean, obviously all wrestling's a work, everything's a work, the draft's a work. We know that guys, talent can and do just randomly switch throughout the year anyway, whenever Vince feels like it. It's not like it's not like the NFL draft or something.
Yeah, and that's the problem, is that it's been so kind of haphazard how they've done this over the years, what the rules are. It's just a mess. So it's hard to sink your teeth into it. Yeah, I don't know if maybe the draft should be limited to, I don't know, 6 people on both rosters, something like that, and then with some leeway to make moves throughout the year, which, as you've touched on, of course they can and do, as they wish. Uh, the other thing is, like, when you move this many people around, it really waters down the whole thing. Where Raw just starts to look like SmackDown. SmackDown just starts to look like Raw. So what's the point of it? And they both kind of lose their identity. I think it's good that the top guys basically stayed on their brands. Big E essentially had made the move to Raw with winning the championship there, so it makes sense that he'd be on Raw. So why don't we talk about Raw? I think most fans, maybe I shouldn't speak for people, but certainly I think Raw has been the weaker brand for a long, long time, and frankly, really hard to watch most weeks. How much of the shakeup changes that? Big E on top with a supporting cast that includes Lashley, who it looks like he might. I don't know if he's done with him or not. I mean, it feels like there's still a little more of a story to be told between those two. Seth Rollins going over there, so you'd think that's going to be a feud for him down the line, maybe soon. Kevin Owens, in terms of like identifying who the potential challengers are. Orton is still there. Styles is there. Finn Balor. That was one that I was sad to see in some ways come over, because he really, I thought, helped make SmackDown a really good show. But having, lost to Roman Reigns, I guess there's only so much he could do over there. So maybe, I don't know if one of them he turns, but you'd think he'd be a challenger. What does Raw look like after the draft?
I think it's a little bit of what you were saying, kind of trying to even things out, spread things out. But I think there's a root problem that's just bigger than even the names on the show. It's a problem with the format of the show, the length of the show, the creative behind the show. And you can change the faces, and that might have a minimal impact. Like, I do think Raw might be a little bit more interesting. And on the converse, I think SmackDown might be a little less interesting coming out of this draft. But I don't think anything really cataclysmic happens from stuff like this. And it's very telling to me, honestly, when you see, again, not to make this company versus company, but the tear that AEW has been on, just being on fire with these must-see shows. And like people have said, Dynamite is, one of the easiest shows to watch. The energy and the kind of momentum. And then you come back to WWE, and it's very exemplary to me. Here they are again doing this very staid and this like 20-year-old concept, trotting it out again, 2 people at a podium, and we're supposed to get excited. And it's just like the ultimate symbolism of what's going on here, that they actually think that this is the proper response. To me, spells everything that's wrong with what's going on. I mean, if I had my way, and I've been blowing this trumpet for years, but this is the time for all hands on deck. I mean, they abandoned the brand split a few years back for a little while. They gave that a try, and then they went back to it. I say, look, you are in a war right now, and the tide is turning. This is when you just put everyone together, just throw everything out there, because they still have way more talent than AEW has. This is not the time to still keep dancing around with this made up brand thing that you just created yourself, out of the blue. Like, this is not the time for that. And again, that's just my opinion. This is the time to put everyone on the front line and just focus on putting on the best shows that you can every week. And that's that.
I disagree, because we've seen them take that tactic, and that was their response to when they would be suffering in the ratings, was to abandon the brand split, and that didn't work either. And essentially what that did was clearly make one of the shows, in most cases SmackDown, the B show, because the episodic storytelling nature of wrestling, you can only do so much, and to advance a storyline from one week to the next is one thing, but to have to advance storylines on Monday and then again on Friday and then tell another chapter on Monday and then again a few days later on Friday is challenging. And inevitably, remember, there were years there where SmackDown was almost Sunday Night Heat. I mean, they wouldn't promote anything on it. They would just kind of throw matches out there cold. Typically, the biggest stars weren't on it. And I think that's where you end up. And Fox isn't having that. If anything,
right, but
WWE is, SmackDown has sort of become the A show because of how much money Fox is paying them, and because they've got their biggest talent there, Roman Reigns and now Brock Lesnar. So I don't think that's the answer.
Well, that's the thing, though. SmackDown was not on Fox when they last reunited the brands. I think it was, I forget, was it on Sci-Fi or some ridiculous thing? It wasn't on Fox. Now it's on Fox. I think you absolutely could do compelling TV twice a week. Look, I know it's only been a few episodes, but AEW is doing exactly that now with Dynamite and Rampage. I mean, and they're even taping both in the same night, so they're keeping all the energy going. It's the same crowd.
But it's also, Dynamite's 1 hour less than Raw, and Rampage is 1 hour less than SmackDown.
That is a huge problem that WWE has, and I think everybody would agree. Like, I can't find anybody that's like, yeah, I love that Raw is 3 hours. Like, there's nobody who feels that way. The only people who feel that way is WWE and advertisers, because
and I get that,
that's why it'll never go away, because there's so much. I don't know about never, but that's why they're very reluctant, because there's money to be made. And as long as a network is able to say, yeah, we're okay with giving you 3 hours, they're going to take 3 hours. Look, if USA Network said, you want 4 hours, they do 4 hours.
Right. It's more revenue coming in without a lot more costs, because they're there anyway, right? So it's not an extra night of production, getting the trucks out, paying the talents. You just an extra hour to Raw. So I don't see that going away. And again, I don't think merging the brands really does anything. The other, while there isn't a brand split in AEW, what you do have between Dynamite and Rampage is typically people who wrestle on Dynamite won't wrestle on Rampage. So you've got a certain amount of stars, and 1 week, if you want to see Jon Moxley wrestle, this week it might be on Rampage, next week it might be on Dynamite. And I suppose WWE could do that, but they weren't terribly disciplined about doing it last time that they had the rosters merged. And so you'd have them wrestle on both nights, and one just meant a lot less than the other. Let's talk about one person in particular, spend a little more time on him. Big E, a month or so ago, a little more, was a mid-carder, upper mid-carder with some momentum on SmackDown. Now essentially the top guy on Raw, that maybe it's feeling like the B show now, but it is the flagship and has been for a long time. What do you see as his upside? Is he potentially a needle mover, a difference maker?
I had him pegged for this years ago. I mean, it's easy to say this is where he should have been a year or two ago, and I definitely feel that way. Like, I think that he was a natural opponent for Roman Reigns. I mean, I know why they didn't do it. I mean, they had a lot of other options that they saw as better at the time, but I think he could have been. I would go so far as to say that I think he had the potential to be exactly where he is now before New Day even existed. I felt like he was one of the guys to really hang your hat on. And that's why my initial reaction to New Day in the beginning was, oh my God, why are they doing this to this guy? Like he should be in the main event. Like, even then I felt that way. And so, I mean, I'm glad it's finally happening. I think this is what people want, and WWE seems to have a problem with that, and that's why their booking sometimes is so unsatisfying compared to AEW, because it's such a simple formula. Give people what they want, even if it's predictable. It's a catharsis. It's what the fans want to see, rather than, I understand teasing things and not completely satisfying your audience because you want them to keep coming back for more. But you can't have this pathological attitude that WWE has of constantly frustrating your audience like that. There's just something weird about it. And so this is great because it's something that people actually want, and they're getting it, and they're not, having it kind of thrown back in their faces. So I think it's a great step in the right direction.
I mostly agree. I think it creates a lot of goodwill with your existing fan base. I think it's a guy who fans had a connection to, and kind of a sympathetic favorite, and a fresh face, and a guy who can put on exciting matches. He checks a lot of the boxes. All that said, I don't see him being a difference maker, right? And that's one of the problems that WWE has is, you look back to The Rock and Steve Austin and those guys, John Cena, and there was that time where they were just burning so hot. It felt like that trajectory, it happened fast from where the fans really got behind them, and WWE got behind them in response, and then they were the top guy. And I heard somebody make this point. I forget who it was. Somebody. It feels like a Jim Cornette thing to say, but it wasn't Jim Cornette. But Big E to some extent has been not defined down, but defined as what he is for so long, right? I mean, he's got like 10 years in the company now. That while similar to when Kofi got the title, it is a feel-good moment, and your existing fan base likes it, but that's not going to set business on fire, right? And I just don't see a situation where Big E at the top, now you see the ratings really start to increase, and more people coming out to the arenas. And that's not at all a slight on Big E, who I like a lot. It just doesn't feel like he's that guy. In part because we've seen him for so long, right? I mean, this is the problem with waiting. These super slow burns. Is that people. And the other thing that I think is really short-sighted, and they had an opportunity here to correct, and they just did it again, was keeping New Day separate. I mean, I think that together they are more than the sum of their parts. Together, they are one of the most popular acts in WWE in the last 10 years. I mean, they are. They sell tons of merch. Fans love them. And I don't think it's like mutually exclusive that either they are together or they're separate and Big E is the champ. I think you can have them on the same brand as they did with Kofi, and have them appear together, and Big E is the world champion. And I think he's actually elevated by having that support system that is so popular, because it's just not the same act when he comes out by himself as it is when the three of them are together. And sometimes it's cloying, and it's a bit much. It's not that they always hit home runs, but it is now a proven popular act. And, it's good that they occasionally get them together for pay-per-views and things like that. But I don't see the need to keep them apart. One of the cool things about New Day is that it feels so sincere. It really feels like three guys who love each other, who are genuinely best friends, who have each other's back. And that's what made Kofi's title win at WrestleMania a few years ago so special, and having them there for Big E's win several weeks ago. But otherwise, it's like, they're kind of on their own, and it's an important part of the formula that's missing, I think.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful if New Day continued to be kind of part of Big E's, entourage, let's say, even as world champ, kind of like how Lashley has had the Hurt Business, I mean, and or the Horsemen and things like that. But the thing that needs to be said too, though, when you're talking about Kofi, and this is the difference. I mean, look, I don't know if this is just my perception. I think this is fairly the general perception. Big E was always the star of that group. He was always the top guy of the three, and Kofi was not. And Kofi, for as much as his win was glorious and it was the highlight of that WrestleMania and it should have closed the show, his title reign was not a success. People rejected him. Fans rejected him. And I think only part of that was the booking. I just think they had a hard time once he finally got there, seeing him in that spot. And I don't think they have that trouble with Big E. He's just got more. And I'm not saying, like you said, he's going to set the world on fire. But I think he's one of the best options they have right now. And he definitely is the star of New Day.
Yeah. I think, I mean, still very early on. And so the jury is out. But I think he's going to get some big wins under his belt,
Should.
And that's the good thing about this shakeup. I expect and I hope that, he beats McIntyre clean in Saudi Arabia. Maybe not so great for McIntyre, who's now dropped several in a row. I think you could do the rematch with Lashley and have him go over clean and start essentially feeding him guys. I mean, I'd like to see a program with AJ. I'd like to see a program with maybe Kevin Owens, these guys who are established guys, and have him go over strong. All that still, I don't know, puts him much higher than he is now. I just don't know that he's a difference maker. And frankly, I don't think WWE has the difference maker on their roster right now.
No.
And another name that kind of been in the news as part of the draft. He stayed in Raw, but kind of rebranded. Keith Lee. It's similar in that, like, you've got a guy who there was that window for him to have that momentum, and they didn't do that. It's just the WWE way of doing things. That it's the slow build. You beat a guy a bunch of times, you define him down, and then sometime down the line, years later, you try to make him a top guy, and now he's got all that baggage. So I don't know. One, I think we talked about it in the last episode, but one potential example of kind of doing it right is Braun Breaker, right? I mean, over on NXT, and I haven't loved what they've done with NXT the last few weeks. We've talked about it. I get why they're doing it, but it is good to see something we haven't seen so long, which is like the new guy, the unknown, who debuts and kind of catches on, and you see the upside, and they just push hard. And he's headlining the next takeover, challenging for the title. I don't think it's a bad idea to put the title on the guy. Is he green? Sure. And that's always the WWE way of doing things, is that you exhaust yourself coming up with reasons why not to do something. And you could do that. He's got all kinds of limitations and shortcomings, but he also has something special, right? So I think you go all in. I'm interested in seeing that.
Yeah, I think he's got. I mean, you don't need me to say this, but he's got tremendous star potential. He's got a great look. He's got natural ability. He seems like he could be.
Just huge. Yeah,
he could be the kind of guy that could be the guy at one point. I'm a little bit trepidatious at the complete lack of experience that he has. Like, I think the matches we've seen him in on NXT, I believe, are the only matches he has ever had in front of an audience.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
That's a little bit, that might be a little bit too fast. I mean, like to have zero crowd experience and just get thrown out there. I mean, look, if it works, it works. Go for it. But he's really, 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 really not ready from that point of view. You know what I mean? Like, there's just, I don't know what to say. It's like, you take.
But it's also, yeah, I hear you. But also remember, part of what they've done is, I think, more clearly define NXT as developmental, and in a way that makes that championship and being the top guy in NXT sort of mean less. So where a year ago, or really even just a few weeks ago, being the NXT champion was like this big important role. You're one of the top guys in WWE. It doesn't feel like that. It means that much anymore. So there is more leeway, I think, in taking an unknown who you have high hopes for, put that title on him, and essentially don't waste any time. Now, that doesn't mean that he's ready to be a top guy in Raw or SmackDown, But I think it's fine to, strap the proverbial rocket to his back on NXT. And maybe in 6 months, a year, you could call the guy up. And, the thing is, like, don't pull back so much. That's what you see so much. You saw it with, especially that's been the issue with NXT guys. You saw Keith Lee, make it to the top on NXT, be the champion, come over to Raw, and just be squandered. So don't pull back.
They had a real problem with the old NXT, as we all saw, and how they would transition people over. A lot of guys that were ready, that were completely ready, guys that were even proven commodities before they got to NXT, and they got spoiled and they got ruined. But I think we're seeing now the opposite problem. This is the quandary that WWE is in now with NXT. They've established this brand. They've established this show as a destination show on a major cable network and all this stuff with advertising dollars. And now they're saying, well, we want to go back to just treating it as developmental again. And there's a problem there, because now you're playing this out, this developmental system, with guys that are green as grass and are going to get like 10, 100 times better, guys that aren't quite ready yet. You're throwing them out there on national television in front of the whole audience. So everybody's seeing that developmental process and their improvements and everything. And I don't know if that's the best idea, but I don't know what the solution is, because now you're stuck with USA and everyone saying, okay, well, we need content, I don't know if you can have your cake and eat it too, because I think in the long run, it hurts a lot of these guys. We didn't see, this would be the equivalent of, imagine if like OVW's show back 20 years ago was on national television on USA Network, and you saw Batista as Leviathan and John Cena as the Prototype, and you saw all those guys, Brock Lesnar when he was right out of college. Like, I think it would have only hurt those guys. It wouldn't have helped them.
Yeah, I agree. On that topic, why don't we talk about the call-ups that they did do as part of the draft? So on Raw, let me go through this. Austin Theory, who was briefly on the main roster last year. He actually was part of WrestleMania in 2020, but clearly kind of a reintroduction. He had his angle with Jeff Hardy, which I thought was pretty good. The Hit Row members, are they on Raw or SmackDown?
SmackDown.
Yeah. Who else do we have here? Is that it? On Raw? It might be.
There weren't a ton.
The women, yeah. Tegan Knox and Mia Yim. I don't know. Were they on the? I mean, I know Mia Yim was part of that awful.
Right.
What do they call them? Yeah, whatever they call them. But otherwise, we didn't see her. Yeah, we didn't see her much. Yeah, and on SmackDown, who do we have? Let's go through these names. Yeah, not a lot. BFAB, Xylee, Aaliyah. So yeah, a few women. Interesting. I don't know what the message is if you're a Roderick Strong or a Kyle O'Reilly. Is it just a case now that they're lifers in NXT? Do you think? And is that? I mean, I guess there are worse things in the world. They're probably making a little more money than they were before coming over to NXT. But it's maybe a little discouraging, sort of being told like, yeah, you're just never going to be good enough for the main roster.
They feel like hostages right now to me. Like, I feel, for some reason, I feel especially bad for Roderick Strong. He just seems lost. Just like you could even, I don't know if I'm reading too much into it, but even looking at him when he's out there, he just has this kind of deer in the headlights. Like, what am I doing here? I'm better than this kind of expression on his face. I mean, the guy was one of the most anticipated indie acquisitions that they got.
But they got him about 10 years too late also. I mean, not that he's any less talented than he was 10 years ago, but now he's a 38-year-old guy, right? It's just sort of like, I feel like part of this NXT transition is taking those guys who, for better or for worse, have not been called up, and maybe just kind of having a reality check and recasting them to say, look, you guys are just not main roster guys. but you are important pieces of developmental, and I think they maybe almost transition into sort of player coach roles where their role, they did that for a number of years with guys like what's his name, the authority figure in WWE, Adam Pearce, sorry, who never really wrestled for WWE, but they saw something in. And so they saw some value in hiring him. And I wonder if that's what kind of becomes of all these guys who've just never been called up. It is like, yeah, we feel like you've got something to offer. Even a Tommaso Ciampa, you put the title on him, but it's clear to me that they don't have super high hopes for him on the main roster. And his role might be to help get over a Braun Breaker. It's just sort of revealing who has been identified as that type of wrestler. I imagine some of it has to do with age. Again, Roderick Strong pushing 40. Even Io Shirai, you thought would have been called up a long, long time ago, still doesn't get called up. And I start to think, well, maybe she just never gets called up.
I think the problem with some of them, like the worst thing that ever happened in hindsight to me, to Ciampa and Gargano, is when they briefly, it wasn't even an official call up, I don't think, but they briefly brought them on Raw.
Yeah.
And they were there for a couple of weeks. They did an angle with somebody, and you saw these guys who were like the ultimate badasses of NXT, and it looked like they came from Munchkin Land when they showed up on Raw, and I think that killed them, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's the thing, and I think a lot of people are pointing that out about Adam Cole as well, that now he's poised to be this huge star on AEW. Already is one in a lot of ways. And there was no sign that he was ever going to get any kind of break in WWE. But again, for better or for worse, that's their vision. For WWE, he was too small. And, as trivial as that might sound, it's real to them. And they were never going to get past it. So
I understand. Yeah. I understand it a bit. I do. I'm not saying I totally.
I do too. He is. To this day, there are some guys that it's not the best comparison, but I remember Rey Mysterio working with Brock Lesnar a few years ago, and they had a fun match and a fun program. But that was anybody who thought Brock Lesnar should just be selling like crazy for Rey Mysterio. It's like, no, you can't do that. No. And that was going to be a challenge for Adam Cole as well.
Right, because he, I get it in a way, like I said, because he's very talented. He's got great charisma. He's a great promo. He's over like gangbusters in AEW. I mean, if you were at the show like I was a couple of weeks ago, you heard people constantly doing the Adam Cole Bebe thing. Like, I mean, he is hugely over, but to look at him,
he's small even in AEW.
Yeah. He doesn't even look like a wrestler. Like, it's not even that he's not like some massive, like he's not Brock Lesnar. Like, he doesn't even have like muscle definition. No. My arms are probably bigger than his arms, which isn't saying much. He just doesn't look like a wrestler. And I
just looked up his height, and Wikipedia's got it as 5'11". I don't know if I can curse on this, but I'm tempted to. Bull. I mean, there's no way he's 5'11".
No, he's probably like 5'8" or so, I would say. And, I mean, look, there's a place for him. Absolutely. Even on the main roster. But I could understand how a Vince or even a Triple H would look and go, yeah, we can't really have you in main events with Roman Reigns and Brock Lesnar. And it's a little bit ridiculous. Like, even Finn Balor is stretching it, but because the guy has this larger than life vibe, I think it carries him a lot further than somebody his size would normally go. And he's a rarity.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, that's where the roster is now. I mean, do you think where they ended up is essentially their response to AEW? I mean, do they see this as the best possible WWE right now?
You mean NXT or the main brand?
All of it. I mean, I guess that's the idea of the draft, is to sort of optimize everything, right? So putting all the right pieces in place, and if this is WWE putting its best foot forward, is WWE in a better position now than it was 3 weeks ago?
I think this is their version of putting their best foot forward, which alarms me even further, because it shows me that this is not the same company that had WCW knocking on its door 25 years ago and blew up the world in response. Like, this is not the same company, and it does at times, as a lifelong viewer, feel like they're just rolling over and dying. Like they're still the industry leader for so many reasons, of course, but look at how much has changed in 2 years. And I'm thinking, what are we going to be saying 5 years from now? This is how things change in this business. You know what I mean? Like, what's going to happen? This is not the direction of momentum that they want at all.
Is there a card that they can play that they're not playing? I mean, I think one thing that they could and should get in on is this whole idea about the forbidden door, right?
Yes.
And AEW has done a nice job creating all these relationships with different companies. There was some talk that WWE was talking to New Japan that seemed to be part of negotiations to keep Daniel Bryan, and it didn't work out. But I think that could have been a big difference maker. I wonder if there's still an opportunity to do something like that. I mean, I don't know. Ring of Honor's kind of left out of some of this. Not that they have the notoriety or even the talent depth to make much of a difference, but just in order to create some buzz and a new pipeline, because it just doesn't exist anymore. You know, they were working with Evolve for a year or some years, and that's how they were populating NXT for a while. They went away. So, and I know they've kind of taken the opposite tact of let's stop looking at the indies and let's just develop people ourselves. But I mean, I guess you don't know what you don't know, and you don't know who maybe is in the pipeline now that we just don't know about because they don't have much of a body of work. A person like a Braun Breaker maybe becomes that breakout star. I don't know.
You know, Vince is really, and it's ironic to say because he changed the business, but he's from the old school in terms of like wrestling promoter mindsets and things. And I think that's hurting him and it's hurting the company right now. Like, for example, you know, in one of my books, Pro Wrestling FAQ, I took a quote that Gore Vidal said and I applied it to Vince, and I really think it's true, which is, it's not enough that I succeed, all of my enemies must fail. And that is really his point of view. Like, I think, I may sound like a lunatic here, but I think it's not out of the realm of something that could be done to have some type of loose working arrangement between the two companies.
Yeah.
And I even think that that's something that Tony Khan would absolutely entertain if it was put on the table, to have some kind of, I'm not saying they just like merge together, but have some kind of thing where, you know, you could do these like crossover events where it's like Marvel versus DC, like that kind of thing, which those companies did do. I mean, like, that could be done. And that would, you want to talk about moving the needle, that would move it like about 80 miles if they did something like that. But I don't think you will ever see it happen, because that is absolutely not an idea that, in my opinion, that Vince McMahon would ever entertain. Like, I don't even think you could bring it up in his presence. So I just see it happening.
And there's all kinds of obstacles in the way of that, obviously, from USA and TNT and Fox. And then, you know, the challenge whenever this kind of thing has been tried in the past is booking your way out of it, right? So,
right.
And, you know, for example, you know, Kenny Omega and Roman Reigns, that they headline WrestleMania next year. All right, well, who wins that?
Well, what if they even, you know, they could even sidestep? I mean, a couple of things entered my mind a while back when I was writing a story about it once. But I mean, if WWE really is for sale, if they get bought by, I mean, I think most likely it would be NBC Universal. But if they were to get bought, let's say, by Warner Media, now Warner Media owns TNT. So, right. I mean, you could see how they would be interested in doing something like that. But I even think, like, you can even get around, and this is pure fantasy football speculation here, but you could get around the network issue if you made it, any interaction that they had was basically like even like a once or twice a year pay-per-view where it's on the network, so they can control what it is and they don't have to answer to USA or Fox or anybody, you know. I mean, you couldn't really push it on your weekly TV if you did that, but you know, you could push it through social media. I don't know. There's ways that it could be done, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I'd say never say never. You know, there, if you're a comic book movie fan, there's stuff going on now in the Marvel Cinematic Universe that seemed equally kind of implausible just a few years ago. But yeah, I mean, sometimes there are these acquisitions and behind the scenes, and this company buys this one or absorbs this one, and all kinds of new opportunities present themselves. And so yeah, never say never. I think I asked Kenny Omega about just this when I interviewed him some months ago about the whole Forbidden Door, and asked, what is that out of the question? Working with WWE one day, and I forget exactly what he said, but I think it was essentially that: never say never. I mean, certainly not. I think it's going to happen anytime soon, and there are ways to do this where the booking isn't so hard. So yeah, if you have Kenny Omega versus Roman Reigns, that's tough to do. But if you have Kenny Omega versus Kevin Owens, that's not as hard to do, right? I mean, or something like that. Yeah.
Satisfy the audience with decisive finishes on some of those. And that way on some of the other matches where you can't really quite do the decisive finish, like the audience will be a little more forgiving of that. I mean, look, years and years ago, there were title matches, WWF versus NWA, WWF versus AWA, AWA versus NWA. And you know what? Those matches almost never had a conclusive winner. It was a time limit. It was
you always got the count out DQ to go to the draw. If you don't want to go to that too many times, but it's an option.
You can't do it too often. You can't do it too often. But as a once in a while thing, you could probably get away with it.
Yeah, and that's essentially what AEW's been doing with Impact for some time. Again, I think it's easier, less controversial to have Omega beat Rich Swann and those types. But these were things that they had to deal with too.
You could even, if you have your, like, let's say the world champion on one brand is on one company is defending, not necessarily always against the world champion of the other company, but let's say just a challenger from the other company, somebody that could lose, like if Kenny Omega isn't defending against Roman Reigns, maybe he's defending against Kevin Owens or somebody like that.
Yeah,
what I mean? And then he could win conceivably.
What's fascinating is, and to some extent, these conversations have always happened, but it's always been in the interest of the other company wanting to work with WWE. And now, talking about this, it's sort of, well, what could WWE do to help prop them up? And it's one of the things you go to. Well, they could always go work with AEW, which is the hot new thing, which is just crazy. I mean, the way tables have been turned there. So fascinating times. All right. Thanks so much, Brian. As always, I appreciate you checking in here. And right now, let's hear from another rising star from a company making some waves. They've got their biggest show of the year, Bound for Glory, coming up, Impact Wrestling, and the man challenging for the Impact World Championship is none other than the walking weapon, Josh Alexander.
So let's jump into it. We got Bound for Glory coming up this month, the biggest Impact Wrestling show of the year. I know you've been clawing now for 16 years. What's that moment when you get tapped on the shoulder and are told you're challenging for the world title at Bound for Glory? What's that like for you?
Complete and utter disbelief would be the easiest way to describe it. You get told these things, and you say never in wrestling and all this stuff, but then also you say never get your hopes up in wrestling if you're a professional wrestler, if you've learned that lesson over the course of whatever time you've been in the business. So the second, it got said to me that this was a possibility, I had to put it in the back of my mind as that's never going to happen. But then, as the months roll on, everything kind of materializes into, where we are now. And, it started off as disbelief, and it just, you have to settle into going through all these different emotions to, just do the excitement and everything else and try to get those under control leading into such a big match coming up on October 23rd.
Did you feel like you were on this trajectory, or did it take you a little bit by surprise? I mean, obviously, when you and Ethan went your separate ways and you got your singles push up and running, get the X Division title, did it feel like this was a natural path?
Natural, no. I felt like so. So I said to somebody in the writing team when Ethan was going to leave the company, when they were asking what they should do with me, if I had any suggestions and stuff. And I said, I don't know, man. On every indie I've been on the past, 5 to 10 years, people just give me good matches, let me wrestle, and I'll get over, and eventually I'll be your champion. Like that's been the recipe for success at every independent promotion I've started at in the last 10 years. So that's what I said. I was just like, I don't know what else to offer you but that. And then kind of that's exactly what materialized. They just started giving me more opportunities and longer matches and bigger matches throughout the whole, pre-X Division run, leading into the X Division run. And then that was the spot where I could really showcase what I could do, because that's when, you're really shouldering the load for having match of the night and stuff like that. And you're getting marquee matchups against people like ELP and Taurus and Jake something and TJP in an Iron Man match. Like there's a bigger match than that this year, I don't think. Mm-hmm. So, it all just snowballs into this thing where, I have this much momentum behind me because every opportunity you guys are giving me, I'm just making the absolute best of it and killing myself trying to make sure that I get noticed with every single one of these opportunities. So to say, like, it's a natural course of things, but to have it only happen in under a year, that surprises me for sure.
Yeah. Is it extra special that it's Christian Cage that you're working with, and certainly that's not to put down the many great wrestlers who have held that title, but in Christian Cage you're talking, a guy who's talked about as a bona fide legend, a major name, some people at the future Hall of Famer, has that Impact title around his waist again, and again headlining the biggest show with you. So, as a guy coming up through the Canadian wrestling scene, when Christian was a top guy, does it make it extra special?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I've said it before in promos, and I just keep saying it. He grew up 10 miles away from where I grew up. So when I was 10 years old and I turned on, a show and saw him jumping off of a ladder through a table, hailing from Orangeville, Ontario, I was just like, damn, somebody from like my town made it all the way over to Madison Square Garden. Like that's insane. Like that just put like the spark in my mind that wrestling was even a possibility. But like, this specific matchup, being able to like challenge Christian Cage for the world championship as like the match where I'm going to try to prove that I can be a main eventer, that I can try to prove that I can be a world champion. I can draw many comparisons to Christian back in 2004 when he bet on himself and he came to Impact Wrestling because he wanted to prove that he could be a main eventer. He could prove to be a world champion, and he did that. So like I draw the comparisons that way with that, and it makes it that much sweeter for sure.
Yeah. I imagine there are people who used to follow Impact, maybe a lost touch over the years, and now they know the Bound for Glory brand. They're curious about the big matches this year. They know who Christian Cage is. Maybe never heard of Josh Alexander. Is that extra motivation for you to sort of maybe prove yourself in front of a lot of fans that maybe aren't that familiar with you?
Absolutely. There's this enormous gaping chip on my shoulder because social media is like not a complete barometer for how everybody thinks, but there's a lot of people out there that have no idea who I am that might be tuning into this, like you said. And, I can't wait for them to see me for the first time, because I'm going to give them a dose of something that I don't think they were expecting.
Yeah. Let's go back to Ethan leaving the company. I know you've worked singles a lot through your career, but for a lot of people, they knew you as one half of North. When we did the first PWI Tag Team 50 last year, you guys were on the cover. You're one of the top ranked teams. A lot of people very much looked at you as a tag team wrestler. Was that a little, what was that like for you? Were you nervous now, not having that safety blanket? I don't know if you want to call it that, but now going on your own and having the spotlight completely on you, and not having your partner and your good friend to also lean on?
I wouldn't say I was nervous. I was probably more kind of excited for the new challenge, because I personally, for me, it's all about what's next and what's new, and how to excite myself all over again and stuff like that. And like, I'm not going to say the tag team run wasn't exciting towards the end, but it definitely got to a point where it's getting a lot easier. So when I had that new challenge of stepping out on my own and having the focus solely on me and seeing if I could hang and climb to these heights that I'm at now, like it was definitely exciting for me. And, I've made the best of it, I guess.
This might be an incredibly stupid question, but it just came to mind. Do you look at Ethan now with a new partner? And I wonder if like that's kind of weird for you, sort of like, seeing girlfriend with another guy. And it's one thing if you both go on and you have your singles career, but here he is having success in a tag team with somebody who is not you. Is that a little weird?
I mean, I guess in the sense like an ex-girlfriend or something, you can look at it and be like, I don't think he's as good as I was with him. You know what I mean?
Right.
You know, I can look at it like that. Not that I actually even think that. I think that the dynamic between those two, complete opposite of what it was between me and him. Like you're going to get with any pairing, and they're just going to showcase themselves in a completely different way. For sure, the first time I saw it, I was just like in my head, I'm just like, I wonder if this is going to fit as good as we fit. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was cool for you. Again, your old friend, your old partner in the spotlight that he has, working with Sting on national television, that kind of stuff. That's going to make you proud.
Yeah, the Sting stuff, the working with Jericho and stuff like that, like just the little bucket list things that I can see he's checking off along the way. It's just like it makes me proud for sure.
Yeah. So you were coming up or getting started in wrestling when what some people would say was Impact or TNA at the time, their glory years, right? You're talking 2005, 2006 when they had Samoa Joe and AJ Styles on top and were really making waves as the number two. Do you have memories? And were you a fan back then of Impact?
Yeah, I was a huge fan. I ordered the very first Wednesday night pay-per-view with my friends when I was I think it was 15 or 16 years old. And it completely changed my idea of what wrestling could be because I'd seen cruiserweights before, but I never saw X division guys. And then even the stuff they were doing in the heavyweight division, like guys like Abyss and stuff like that. Like it was something different. I was a wrestling fan, but I had fallen out of love with it because there wasn't that alternative to what I was seeing every Monday night. And then the second Impact started, it was just like that was exactly what I needed, and I was a fan from day one.
When you finally came into the company, obviously a lot had changed. They were in a rebuilding a phase. Did you feel like you were working for that TNA that you watched on TV? Did it feel like something completely new?
No, I kind of felt like I was working for that TNA because a lot of the people in management that were in the locker room had kind of come around to being the exact same people that were there at the early years. Like you're talking about Scott D'Amore and Don Callis and these people. If I had come into the company 6 or 7 years earlier, I might not have felt that way because management and everything else was completely different. But I think the ethos or whatever of the company had kind of come around to being the exact same thing it was in those early years, into that building phase of wanting to get all eyes on this company, and that's what we're doing.
Yeah. Is it or how cool is it to have some of those guys that you just mentioned that were part of the formative days, and whether it's Scott or Christian, obviously, Eric Young, Chris Sabin, Petey Williams, Hernandez, there's still a lot of those legacy guys around. Does that help kind of getting a lay of the land?
Yeah, and it helps with me being able to go to somebody like D'Lo Brown, who I looked up to so much as a young fan, and then as an Impact fan, him tagging with AJ Styles is one of my favorite things of all time, and just being able to pick his brain and ask him old stories of stuff that used to happen back in the day when I was a fan and stuff like that. It makes it all that much cooler of a working environment. Yeah,
and there's definitely this Canadian kind of influence that came in around the time Anthem bought the company and Scott and Don got involved. Is that a point of pride for you to see your country? I mean, it's this American wrestling company in some ways, but there's very much these Canadian overtones. But in a good way, you see all these amazing Canadian talents, and they seem to embrace that, right?
Yeah, and I think that we need more eyes on the Canadian independent scene. I think there's a lot of people that deserve opportunities that are on the Canadian independent scene. Luckily, I was able to get it through Impact Wrestling and stuff like that. And for them to showcase, I could probably name a dozen Canadians that are in the locker room right now, which is an insane amount of people, just numbers wise. And for us to be able to represent, not that we're all representing Canada or a country, but we're certainly all proud to be Canadian wrestlers, and to show these people, these young Canadian independent talents, that there's a place to go it definitely means something to me. Yeah.
You're getting this big break, and you had a lot over your career, but this might be the biggest. And it comes 16 years into you being in the wrestling business. Is there any part of that that's bittersweet? Where you're kind of looking at the clock, and you're still a relatively young guy, but It's a long time to have put in. So again, is there any pressure that I really got to make these next few years count because I don't know how much longer you could be doing this, right?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't say there's pressure that way. Maybe it's foolish of me to think this way, but I just have this thing like if I can do what I love and I'm happy doing it, then I don't want to put any like boundaries or any specific like milestones on it for me to be happy. Like I'm just happy being a professional wrestler. Everything else just sweetens the pot. So the fact that this is my career, this is what I'm doing, and the struggles and everything that it took me to get to this point, that all prepared me for like moments like this. This is why this climb that I've had as a singles wrestler in under a year to be main eventing the biggest show in Impact Wrestling in the main event against somebody like Christian Cage for that world championship. I think that wouldn't materialize if I didn't learn all those lessons along the way for 16 years. If I came in here after, 5-6 years experience, I don't think I'd be in the positions that I'm in right now because I wouldn't have been able to make the best of this opportunity.
Yeah. And you talked about it on social media. In some ways, you only very recently became a full-time wrestler, right?
Yeah. And that's solely on me. Like there's always those negative people that want to point out something that like there's problems with money or anything like that. No, I live in Canada. I live in a city where a modest home costs you $1 million, and I have 2 children and a wife. So there was always just this thing with me holding my second career that I had outside of wrestling as kind of my security blanket. I didn't want to get hurt or anything like that, and I probably could have quit 4 or 5 years ago. I never wanted to take the leap, and I got laid off, and I figured it was the perfect time for me to. It was a push in the right direction I needed, right?
So, I mean, that way everything lines up right? I mean, if you're ever going to get laid off, I guess this was the time to do it, right? When you are prepared to become a top guy in a major wrestling company.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I was thinking about it, and, like, the second it happened, I was just like, for now, like, I never say everything happens for a reason until these past few years that I can look back at all these hardships and speed bumps I hit along the way and been like, this happened because of this and this happened because of this. So it all makes sense now. So like, I look at getting laid off from my job and rather than get upset about it, I was just like, oh, this is happening for a reason. I need to follow this. So yeah. It happened at the perfect time.
Have you questioned whether holding another job held you back at all in any ways and in that you couldn't be 100% committed, focused to wrestling?
It certainly did earlier on in my career. I have so many friends that, they made it within the first 5 to 6 years because they were able to stay at home with their parents and not work and, just put everything they could into pro wrestling. Unfortunately for me, I just once I turned 18, I had no more parents. That's it. I don't have any family other than my wife and 2 children and her family. So I was on my own at 18 and I had to work to live and I had to work to fund my wrestling habit as well. So that's why I had to work so hard my entire life.
What were there situations, and maybe this happened often, where you couldn't take a booking like on a Sunday because you had to be on the job site on Monday morning?
There was a couple of those, but usually I would honestly just drive through the night and on no sleep, show up to work an hour late and just work through the day. I always made that work and I paid for it the next day.
You worked in construction, right?
Yeah, and luckily, through the company I got into, the trades I was in, I overworked while I was at work so that they would understand when I had to take time off, and I almost made myself indispensable.
Yeah. That group, your old coworkers in the construction trade, do you feel like they're cheering you on now?
Oh, absolutely. I have a few of them on social media and stuff like that over the years, and for them to they'll check in every once in a while, and especially that one post where I said I'm, going out and just being a wrestler now. So many of them were just like, "Oh, it's about time. You should have done this years ago."
Yeah.
And they're all cheering me on because, I don't know, there's this team mentality when you're on the job site with all these guys. You come up together, you share all your hardships together, and for them to see me have some monetary amount of success, that's great, right?
Yeah. Let me ask you a bit about the world title, and one perspective you could bring to a conversation we've had at Pro Wrestling Illustrated is, is this title a world title? And for a while we didn't recognize it as a world title, and then we did for a few years, and then for the last several years we didn't again until relatively recently, where a new editor-in-chief began recognizing several championships as official world championships, including Impact's world title. What does that title mean to you? I mean, where do you see it in terms of prestige in the wrestling business?
I feel it's a very prestigious championship when you look at the history of it over the past 20 years and who's held it and where it's been defended and all these other things. I don't know what goes into considering championships, world championships or not, but I would certainly consider this one a world championship for me, seeing as it's broadcast around the world. People all over see it and support it. That forbidden door also changes things because people from all over the world from different promotions come in and challenge for it at any time. So it's definitely surreal that I will even be challenging for it. And if I am able to call myself an Impact World Champion, I'll have to go through the emotions of that afterwards.
Yeah. You mentioned the Forbidden Door was something I hadn't thought of. But so when you think about winning that title, do you think about the prospect? I mean, do you look at the AEW roster, the NWA roster, New Japan, and have your eyes on all of that? I mean, do you see yourself taking that belt all over the world and defending it against the top guys in all those companies?
I mean, I hadn't really thought about it, but I would love that. I would totally embrace taking that world championship all around the world and challenging the very best from wherever I'm at, and, showing that Impact Wrestling can hang with anybody.
Yeah. What do you think about where Impact has been? Obviously, again, they went through this growing period after some rough years, kind of starting all over again. Now have made some strides in the last couple of years, rebuilt some of their audience. Like everybody else, dealt a big blow by COVID. But what do you see as kind of their presence and their future? Is it a company that you think is still growing, and what are the heights that it could achieve?
I definitely think it's still growing. I think Impact Wrestling, for me personally, looking at it, I think it's a healthy alternative to the mainstream wrestling companies that you have. We can showcase things like the Knockouts. We can showcase things like the X Division in ways that those other companies might not be able to focus on that kind of stuff. And I think that's what can set us apart. And then, with people like me, Ace Austin, Christian Cage, Moose up in with the heavyweight title ranks, vying for position up there, I think there's just different matchups and stuff like that can happen. And with the relationship Impact Wrestling carries with so many of these companies, you're going to see, matches that you might not ever have been able to see happen because of that. So I think it just adds a healthy alternative. And I definitely think it's definitely got room to grow for sure.
Yeah.
I felt the growth over the past, I've only been here 2.5 years. I felt growth since the moment I stepped through the door in the fan base and everything else that's happened. And I think it's only going to continue to do so, especially now coming out of COVID.
Was it disheartening working through the pandemic in front of completely empty buildings? Again, for a guy whose business is performing in front of live crowds, again that's got to make it tough. And do you look forward to the day where Impact is back in front of potentially some pretty big crowds?
I definitely envision these very big crowds. I look back on some of the older shows from like 2008 through 2011, and I see those crowds. I'm just like, we need to get back to that point. And I know I'm hungry for it. I know a lot of other people in the company are hungry for that kind of stuff. But you just can't do it too fast. So we're working up to it. But throughout the pandemic and stuff, when you say working in front of nobody, if it's disheartening or disappointing or anything like that, and, I don't know if this makes me crazy or whatever. I guess I'm a maniac, but I embraced it. I loved it because I thought the aspect of no crowd being there, no distractions like that, all focus was going to be on the in-ring work. And I think that's why Magic, me and TJP stood out so much to the wrestling world because, we pride ourselves on being very good in the ring. So, there's no holes in our game. So if you put the magnifying glass on it, you're not going to find anything, whereas you might with other people. So it was only to our advantage to have no crowd there, I think.
Do you think maybe, the pandemic helped to give you this opportunity?
For sure at the start coming out, because I was going from being in a heel tag team for 2 years, stepping out on my own as a singles wrestler, switching babyface nearly right away. And I didn't have a crowd that had to react to me and learn to like me at the time. It was just like all of a sudden, I guess he's a babyface. And that made the transition that much easier. And then I was just able to establish, through the countless opportunities and wrestling matches I had. So by the time crowd showed up at Slammiversary for Ultimate X, they had followed along with nearly everything I'd done to that point and seen all the matches, so they were ready to go.
yeah, it kind of catered to your specialty, which is the in-ring product, So it's interesting. Yeah. All right, Josh. Well, look, thanks so much, man. Everybody is going to be cheering you on. I think it's an exciting time to be an Impact Wrestling fan and watching the story.
Cool, man. Thank you.
All right, man. Take care. Good luck.